What do you expect when buying a game? The answer is highly subjective, of course. For some, they expect a specific setting, genre, art style, or theme. For others, it's about narrative or story. And for yet another group, it's about value. Now, value is a tricky term. What is considered valuable to some is worthless to others, the whole one man's trash, another man's treasure sort of thing. But a common interpretation in gaming nowadays is that value means time investment, and a valuable game, or one that provides its worth, is one that you can pour hundreds, even thousands of hours into. There is certainly a place for finite single-player experiences. As an easy example, we can look at Resident Evil 2 and its remake. A masterpiece, if you ask me. But when compared to many other AAA titles out there, it's quite short with its 2 10-or-so-hour campaigns. Now, in my eyes, this in no way impacts the game's appeal. If those shorter campaigns are exceptionally well crafted, it's still worth the money. But for many players, and subsequently development companies and publishers, a shorter length is undesirable. The biggest motivation nowadays for publishers appears to be recurrent spending. Now, that term is just the flavor of the month buzzword that they picked out to try and dress up the motivation of gouging their player base, but they aren't wrong in their determination that a short and relatively enclosed campaign does not offer very much incentive for recurrent user spending. To fix this, there has been a fairly comprehensive shift within the industry over recent years by certain major publishers to emphasize live service games and construct a world able to occupy players for hundreds of hours, during which they offer a large selection of flashy gimmicks which can be even designed to overcome deliberate obstacles they themselves intentionally created, but that's a whole other thing. In theory, this isn't necessarily always bad, but in practice, more often than not, it ends up being a long journey that goes nowhere. Or more commonly, sort of goes somewhere, but not where they advertised, and ends up costing you a fuck ton more than you expected along the way. Probably one of the best examples we can look at is Destiny. As a franchise, Destiny is quite enigmatic. The game was originally built as the spiritual successor to Halo and developed by Bungie under the yoke of Activision Blizzard. One thing the series quickly became known for was its so-called 10-year plan, but there is quite a bit of confusion with this. A lot of players believe that the 10-year plan was meant to refer to the original Destiny game, and that it would evolve as a single entity within that time frame, which was never actually true or intended. As part of a lawsuit wherein Activision Blizzard took on West and Zampella in the wake of Call of Duty Modern Warfare, documents were released that highlight exactly what the agreement actually means. It turns out the 10-year plan was a framework for 4 separate Destiny games which would span a 10-year period with multiple DLC offerings. So while the fanbase bought in under the impression that they were purchasing a long future with support of the original version, that could not have been further from the truth. Destiny faced its fair share of ups and downs. The original game launched in a relatively poor state, with an eventual DLC called The Taken King, which really rounded out the experience to a place where the community embraced it as worthwhile. This process, however, was anything but quick, and already offset the intended timeline of 4 games over 10 years. Soon after the original Destiny had dug out of the trash heap, however, out comes Destiny 2, a complete regression of everything that the original game had overcome, and with it came multiple full-price DLCs, some of which were even worse in terms of content, scope, and quality than the previous game's offerings. The same sort of progression occurred. The initial game was incomplete, but over time it was built back up, and with the eventual release of the Forsaken expansion, it began to be embraced, much like the original with The Taken King. At this point, however, it was already entering the speculative time frame for Destiny 3, and while I am not privy to true insider information, it was pretty obvious that they had barely started to dig out 2, let alone release 3 onto the market, and even if they could kick it out the door, it would be an even worse regression than that which occurred between 1 and 2. It seemed as if the 10-year plan was falling apart completely. Well, Activision Blizzard was of a similar mindset, so much so in fact that on January 10th, 2019, they announced a full split with Bungie, more than 2 full years before their contract was set to expire. In various instances, Activision Blizzard had expressed dissatisfaction with Destiny-related sales, while Bungie had made it clear they held a different point of view, and in the end it was quite clear that these companies wished to be rid of each other. At first, this was a moment to celebrate, and many gamers did exactly that, but on a deeper level, it may not be such a universal positive. For starters, Bungie has partnered with NetEase, a Chinese-based conglomerate that operates much in the same way as Tencent. NetEase, among other things, focuses on social media development and mobile games, so a partnership with Bungie and a minority shareholder position on their part could signify a shift in Bungie's focus for the Destiny franchise over the next few years. The Chinese mobile gaming market is exploding. In fact, there are over 550 million mobile gamers in China alone, which is far larger than the entire population of the United States. China is also the largest market, without question, for mobile game revenue, coming in at almost $18 billion annually in 2017, with that figure increasing at almost an exponential rate. China has also recently seen a freeze on their video game licensing approval metrics as SAP, SAPP, a new governmental committee dedicated to overseeing the video game market, locked down the pipeline in order to establish a more effective and controllable framework. Very recently, the process has started back up though, with mobile games starting to be approved for large Chinese conglomerates like Tencent and NetEase. A bit of an update after my initial scripting. It appears that on February 20th, reports surfaced that the Chinese government has again halted the new game application process, but NetEase and other different large companies are contradicting this and saying that some regulators are adjusting the application process, but there is no halt, which actually kind of strengthens my point of view. With a partnership established between NetEase and Bungie, a split from Activision, and an unannounced Destiny project in the works, combined with the Chinese gaming mobile market factors, it is not out of the question that Bungie is working towards a mobile title much in the same way as Diablo Immortal. Now, Bungie has claimed that their newest Untitled Destiny project does not affect Destiny 2, but as a personal opinion, I find that very hard to believe, and regardless of how it all shapes up, the Destiny roadmap has now completely shifted away from what was advertised as a 10-year plan in order to reel players in with the assurance of purchase security. The Destiny franchise was built around the 10-year concept, and it is probably one of the better examples of a concept getting marginally close to meeting that 10-year benchmark, but even then it has fallen woefully short and taken some branching and unexpected turns along the way. Not to mention the fact that in the journey so far, where fans expected to pay $60 and then maybe some more here and there for specific DLC, they would have had to pay hundreds of dollars to experience the content as it launched. Destiny is a good example of a game, or games plural, that went somewhere during their lifespan, but what about a game that went nowhere? There are quite a few examples, but a great one to focus on is Mass Effect Andromeda. Mass Effect Andromeda was a lackluster release at best, and just 5 months after launch day, it got put out to pasture. Where its predecessor, Mass Effect 3, had been supported for well over a year, with story DLC and various updates, Andromeda got put out of its misery fast. The biggest issue was that there were so many unanswered questions. Anyone who played through the storyline of Mass Effect Andromeda will likely have many. There are story or quest threads that clearly were destined to go somewhere, but instead went nowhere and would now, with the collapse of any future development, never see the light of day. While the game was not sold, strictly speaking, with a 10-year plan or anything even remotely similar, it was still viewed by fans within the framework of the Mass Effect franchise, and through that lens, it was not expected that the game would get guillotined just 5 months after launch. Another angle to consider is that the game had a hefty section of dedicated online cooperative play, with a loot box-fueled economy. While it was admittedly a loose interpretation of a live service game, that's still what it was expected to be, and some players invested heavily into the loot box system, only to have that investment ripped to shreds as the game got iced. Mass Effect Andromeda from BioWare is also a perfect lead-in to Anthem, another BioWare game, but this time one that was sold quite literally with a 10-year plan. I'll spare everyone the rehash details here, but to say the very least, Anthem is a colossal fucking failure. I grappled with the fandom for weeks, even months, trying to express how and why Anthem was a failure. Over and over, threads would pop up on Reddit about how I was just a negative YouTuber hating on it for clicks and other ignorant shit. But flash forward to now, and the Anthem roadmap has been completely scrapped, with no advertised release date in sight for nearly all of the features that were meant to round out the pathetic launch day version. Not only has their future content roadmap been thrown out the window, but major developers have left the project to move over to Dragon Age 4, the next big title from BioWare. And while the potential might exist for Anthem to claw its way back from the ashes, is that really even something we are entertaining? EA has a history of giving studios the axe when they underperform, not to mention the track record with a title like Mass Effect Andromeda, again, unceremoniously being put down after a relative failure. And with other major titles pulling BioWare's talent in different directions, how and why would this game ever live up to its 10-year plan? Games certainly exist that start rough and build up over time. The original Division game is probably a great example of exactly that. I would argue it never reached the benchmark set forth at their dishonest E3 reveal trailer, but after hitting the market as a broken mess, it bounced back after over a year of continuous development and patching. The issue, though, is that for every live service game that finds its way back from the brink, there are two that don't. The cycle is pretty simple. Publishers nowadays prioritize forward-looking live service games because they can reach higher profit levels through recurrent user spending. Something like GTA 5 Online is probably the flagship of that principle. They will also use whatever tricks they can to try and spike pre-orders and initial player-base numbers, but when those hollow tricks fall short, or the game underdelivers on faulty expectations because of the now mainstream tactic of showing flat-out lies at conventions, they typically wind down development and reallocate resources away from dying dying projects with the intent to explore new ideas. There is nothing inherently wrong with cutting off failed projects and finding something new. On principle, that's a healthy and necessary maneuver for any company. But when the model is selling something with the implied or even explicit expectation that it have a long-lasting lifespan with a regular update cycle, or worse yet, posing the claim that it will have a 10-year future and then drastically changing the framework of that future, or to go even further, just ripping the rug out completely, it breeds an atmosphere of distrust which only serves to create an unsteady foundation for future game releases. My proposition is this: never believe the future plans or claims that companies, developers, publishers lay out. Just flat out, do not believe them. If the industry can adopt a punishingly decisive atmosphere of judging games as they are, and not buying into the "but in a year it will be good" mentality, then it will start to reshape the launch day expectations so that something hits the scene in a passable or even well-crafted state, and then maybe gets built out further over time, which would be a positive thing, but if it doesn't, at least players didn't get effectively scammed. Live service games all too often are a journey to nowhere because we as players buy into the marketing, the hype, and the promises that more is coming or it will be good soon, and other empty claims. They might be true, but they often aren't. And even when they are true, they are rarely true in the way that they were advertised or expected to be. So until players stop letting roadmaps and future plans exist as armor, they will continue to be used as smokescreens. That's it though. I've got a couple indie games I'm exploring right now to see if I can do another indie game spotlight for that series, because it's just about time to find something amazing to cover and be happy about, but until then, it is what it is. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. There is typical YouTuber stuff, merch, communities, etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.